mind, if any of you have questions, I'm going to ask that you raise your hand. But I am going to ask that you have to be loud. So I'm going to try and record this. At about 7 o'clock, I'm going to try and wrap it up because I think one of the most exciting things that happen as part of these panels is that we take the chairs away and everybody stands around and gets to know each other. There's a lot of networking, a lot of conversations. Maybe somebody's working on an issue or is part of an activist organization that you'd like to know more about. That happens in that last hour plus. Okay, so don't think we're kicking you out when we grab your chair. We're not. We want you to stay and we want you to talk. So thank you again all for coming, and let's start our panel conversation. So our first panelist here, and I'm going to sit down in my nice comfy chair, is someone that exhibited here during COVID. So as I said, there are catalogs for those that didn't get to see her work. Her name is Justina Jama, and she exhibited here in January of 21. She is an architectural designer, and I invited her because she had a residency here, and she did a lot of research on buildings on the east side, and I'll let her tell you more about that. Justina, you have a soft voice, so make sure the mic's close.
Thanks, Shirley. So my name's Justina Jama. I was here in the 2021 cycle for the Activism in the Arts program that fall, and the work I did was about exploring the post-industrial landscape of Buffalo, specifically for this past exhibit, the East Side community, and a big part of the project was about engagement with the community. So I went through legal channels to kind of cast these misused or otherwise seemingly abandoned buildings, and met a lot of neat people along the way who kind of have similar outlooks on what they want to see in the future on the Buffalo's East Side. Starting some interesting conversations on what we can do in that community. And so while I was doing that work by night, I was also working at an architecture firm here in Buffalo by day in downtown Buffalo. So that's a little bit about the exhibit and myself.
Can you say a little bit more about when you say casting the buildings? Explain to people that didn't see the artwork what that means.
Sure, yeah. So when I went about the process of casting these various surfaces, I essentially, if you're familiar with the material of latex rubber, so I would apply that in layers to kind of the surfaces of buildings that have kind of have gone decades and decades without any sort of anthropogenic intervention, and so you get a lot of basically this interfacing with the man-made building that had been exposed to weathering and the elements over time, and kind of all of kind of like the gunk and like the rust and the lichens that started to grow, and it kind of expresses this like vulnerability of these structures, not just from a temporal materiality standpoint, but the vulnerability of the community. It took a lot of trial and error, kind of getting the mixture right, trying to get the pieces to support themselves and also be able to withstand the process of removal, because they were quite large pieces, some walls like 12 feet wide, or, a story high in some cases. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. What I tell people is if you ever put Elmer's glue on your hand and peeled it off and you could see the texture of your skin and the pattern of your skin, it was similar to that on an enormous scale.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to let Dr. Taylor introduce himself. This is, and this is not a new topic to you. This is something that you've been speaking on. Well, you're very young, so not that long. But then I think what I'm interested to hear from you is what is different in this moment, in this last year, these last 6 months, as there's been so much attention on the East Side. What do you see or hear or feel that seems maybe different? And if it's nothing, then let's hear about that too.
Thank you very much. I'm both a historian and an urban planner. So in many respects, I think of myself as a time traveler. I'm as comfortable in 1820 as I am in 50-50, and we haven't even gotten there yet. I say 50-50 because planning is always about the future. And my work itself centers around the processes of change over time, with a particular emphasis on how we build cities. And my working ongoing hypothesis is that in the United States, the way we build cities is racist and is based on class exclusion and the dehumanization of people. We have no respect for human dignity in this country, and that's reflected in the way in which we build cities. And I say we have no respect for human life or dignity because if we did, the only way we would be able to see the conditions on the East Side is to go to some kind of history museum where those kinds of historical artifacts would be located. The past year on Buffalo's East Side, I think, has been characterized by three kinds of trends. On the one level, I've seen a continuing awakening of the residents in those communities. And people have started grassroots movements to rebuild and transform their communities and their neighborhoods. And there's been a higher level of organization down on the ground and inside of the neighborhoods and the communities that's there. And we see it at all locations and all places. I'm also the chairman of the board of the King Urban Life Center, which is located on Genesee Street in the Broadway-Fillmore area. And even in that place, which has really been devastated by Buffalo city building process, we see that. Started working with groups in a number of different locations and places, and I'm sure Denise will talk about the things that are going on in the Fruit Belt. That's at one level. At another level, we have seen a growing interest in people wanting to invest on the East Side. And right now, based on our count, over $2 billion are either being planned and implemented in projects that are being developed. And that doesn't even include the governor's $1 billion for the coverage of a certain part of the East Side. So we see dollars flowing into the East Side. Then we see some really bad things, mostly coming from City Hall, mostly coming from greedy entrepreneurs. And these things are taking two forms. One is the emergence of all these symbolic projects. And I say a project is symbolic because it's designed to create hope and possibility in a moment when they know nothing is going to happen. It's a game. And so we say these symbolic projects because they will never lead to the structural transformation of these communities. They're full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The other dimension is that white folks, in their ingenuity, have found a way to turn the East Side into a big jobs program for white folks. Understand it. When we talk about $2, maybe $3 billion being invested on the East Side, we must ask the question, who gets the contracts? Who gets the jobs? And they will mostly be white folks. And those dollars will flow through the black community like water through a sieve, en route to the suburban communities where they will, in fact, multiply and produce greater jobs and greater opportunities. So with all of this money coming in, we see folks out in the suburbs popping champagne corks and lighting cigars because this is the beginning of a good time for them, and City Hall is the architect of all of that. I better stop now.
And I think, Denise, as we talk about, City Hall and projects that are symbolic, I want to hear from you about the people that you have been living alongside for 70, again, you're very young. I know you're in a multi-generational house.
Yes.
I want to hear about it from your perspective, what you see in your community, what you see that the people, I read some of your quotes, the people, what are the people looking for? What do they need to have neighborhoods and neighbors and communities?
Interesting conversation. I was talking with a young woman today who I like a lot, and she was talking about a project that they're looking to do, in the neighborhood, and she was very excited. And I tried to relate to her the fact that my neighborhood has had so many broken promises and broken dreams. It feels a lot like when I come out of my house, or when you come out of your house and you see how the leaves have fallen, and they're just scattered all over the place. And they're really pretty, right? But they don't really serve any purpose once they fall off the tree. And they just move and they scatter as they want to. And you can't really do anything with them and pick them up and put them to another location where they blow around somewhere else. But that's what it feels like a lot for us. There's all of these things that have been promised, all of these dreams and hopes over generations that have just fallen down onto the ground and scattered around our feet, and they're lifeless. And we have to just try to shuffle them around and move around them and keep on going. It's tough. I always say to people, I know for people that don't live in black communities, they see things in the news about crime. There's all this conversation right now about crime, where voting is happening, right? So they're terrifying white people because they want you to, clutch at your chest and, oh my God, look at these people and they're just out of control and there's all this crime, it's rampant and everybody's gonna get killed and it's just gonna be terrible. And while we look on and we see that the reality of the situation is that we are always being used for someone's figment of imagination to create a situation where they benefit off of us. It's generational, it's not new, but it still is painful. I try to be very specific about communities. I hate that word community. People use it all the time, and it's become a buzzword. It's a warm and fuzzy moment where, people toss around this phrase of community, and I never know where they're talking about or what they're talking about. I talk specifically about the Fruit Belt because that's where I live. That's my hood. That's where my people are. I have neighbors that were there when my family moved in, and that's been more than 75 years ago at this point. There's a woman that lives across the street from me that I've known almost my whole life. We live in a neighborhood where some people were born in the house they live in all their lives. You know, some people have just, you know, they've owned a house since they were young, and that's where they planted themselves. And in my community, much as how I raised my own children, I have told them this is not a commodity. This is not something you get to buy and sell and just trade away. People have had to maintain these properties with sweat equity. It's taken a lot to hold on to these properties, and you just don't sell that. So, you know, talking about all of these things that are supposed to be coming, all the pie in the sky, the real is that as I travel through this country, I just came back from Atlanta where I was in the midst of 200 young Black people who are farmers. They are going back to the land, and they are learning to grow food for themselves and for their communities to survive. Because we know that all the conversation about the food chain is broken and there's lack of transportation. We know what that means. It's coded language for us that if we don't get ourselves together and learn how to grow something for us, we are going to starve. We are having the hardest time now just to hang on to what we have. And I'm just being real with you because that's what I do. I'm telling you that in our threads for social justice, we are hearing that by this time next year, you're going to see homelessness like you have not seen before. And anywhere you go across this country, you see it already in vast amounts. It's unimaginable that people have to live like that. But that's how they have to live, because the government considers that if you are a low-wage worker, if you're a person that doesn't earn enough money, if you're an older person, if you're a person of color who hasn't gained status, you are collateral damage. And white folks fall in that category with us if they're also poor. That's just real. I have a hard time talking about, you know, all the projects and all the promises because I haven't seen anything. I know that there was money supposed to be invested in something I have been fighting for years that will benefit my community. And where are the checks? Where is the money? Who's holding the money back? Because we don't have it, and we haven't seen it. And I don't know that Christmas is coming for us. But what I do know is that we have enough sense to understand that we have to do some things for ourselves because, as I said before, there's no savior coming for us from City Hall. It's not happening. So all of all of that conversation out there about who's the best politician and what they're going to do and who the heck cares? There are people that are literally sleeping in the streets downtown, have been there for years, and have nowhere to go. There are people in our city that are starving. They have no food. You know, if we can look out our front doors and understand that right where you live, there's a child that's right in your neighborhood that is not gaining enough food, they don't have enough access to be able to have a healthy, normal life, that's the only thing that matters. And if we're not paying attention to that, then we're really not doing justice to anything. I tell people all the time, I'm telling you, it speaks volumes to a Black child who lives in a community that's never seen investment, what their worth is. You want to talk about why people are in situations where they're desperate and there's crime? If I live over here and all you live over there, and I've never seen you come and talk to me or my family, you've never come and brought us anything, you don't care how we're living, you don't care that my streets are broken, you don't care that we have a grocery store, you don't care how we're living. But you want me to have hope. You want me to vote. You want me to be this upstanding citizen that you haven't even taught me how to be. I want you to think about how that feels to them. They understand. It speaks volumes to a child of color who's never seen help come to their people and to their community, that they are not valuable, that you don't care. And if you think about why the voting is so low in populations of color in this city, that's probably why. I probably said too much, but you know, that's what I do.
Thank you. I know that there's too much, and I'm not going to, you can hand the microphone. So Matt Kenyon is the artist, one of the two artists on display here in the space, and Matt is also looking at issues of housing, of climate change, of the way that these issues that we're talking about are impacting frontline communities. And if you can speak a little bit to that, Matt, and even I think it's to hear about your personal experience in Baton Rouge too.
So my name's Matt Kenyon. Yeah, I'm a graduate director in the Department of Art and Design at University of Buffalo. And I'm in my 5th year in Buffalo. I moved here with my wife, Laura Maris, about 5 years ago. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the central sculpture in the exhibition that I put together with Jason Ferguson, one of my colleagues from Eastern Michigan. The central sculpture is called Kicking the Ladder, and it's a brand new piece that is a variation on a project called Tide. And so inside the Champagne Tower are tiny little sculptures of modeled after actual houses from the west side of Buffalo, where I live, and also in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where my family lives. And in 2016, my family and a large part of the Baton Rouge community were flooded by a storm. It wasn't a hurricane, it was one of these new types of storms that just sort of parks itself over a part of the city that previously hadn't really flooded, and proceeded to flood the hundreds, thousands of homes. And the negative impacts of that continue to this day. And so in response to that event, and thinking about the impending housing crisis that is really intersectional with the climate crisis that we're all experiencing, wanted to create a sculpture that talked about the sort of mythologies about trickle-down economics, right? This idea, this false idea that you know, if you give the wealthy enough money, that some of it will trickle down. And I prefer, there's another story to it, another metaphor. It's the story of the horse and the sparrow. And that is, if you feed a horse enough oats, some of it will pass down to the sparrows on the street. And I think, you know, that's a little more accurate story of our economic situation. But anyway, so the houses are cast out of a material that has the same refractive index as water, and so they effectively disappear. What I think, you know, I've seen and we continue to see is that after these climate events, that the media moves on to the next tragedy, and the people who have been negatively impacted are left. You know, the real trickle down is the negative externalities of these, the housing crisis and the climate crisis. And then I have 3 other projects in here that are participatory, and I encourage you all to take sheets of them. They're all microprinted papers, and so the lines on the paper are all microprinted text that you can read with the magnifier here. You can take them, and each of them deals with a different subject. The yellow legal tablets are a circulating memorial for Iraqi civilians that died as a result of the US-led invasion. The middle stack is alternate ruled paper, this kind of lined paper that many of us learned to write our letters as children with. And that the microprinted lines contain details about children who've been killed or injured in gun violence that occurred on campuses, school campuses. And then the last project is logarithmic paper that is a memorial for people that we've lost due to COVID. And the forms of these paper, although appear blank, they're loaded with this very serious and heavy content, and I'm encouraging people to take these pieces of paper as stationery and to write members of government using the paper, and in that way we can smuggle this sort of memorial into the official archives of our governments and use it as a platform to share our opinions and thoughts about how these different tragedies, these different pandemics that we're dealing with, both U.S. involvement in foreign wars, the pandemic of gun violence, and then the literal, COVID pandemic, things, so we can push for the change that we'd like to see in our communities. And I'm really happy to be on this panel with all these really great people.
Thank you. So, we talk about, I'm going to try not to have
No, you're good.
anything down. We came here, the idea was that maybe by bringing different people together that think differently than maybe City Hall, we could have some conversations that would allow all of us to think a little bit differently. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think, when there are these myths about communities, I think the idea of violence, Justine, one of the things I wanted to speak to you about is this sort of myth of abandonment. A lot of these structures that you were working on, when you did your due diligence and your research, what did you find about those buildings? And they were all on the east side, and they were all just in some level of decay. But what did you find when you researched about abandonment?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I mean, there was a whole host of conditions that I saw. I mean, when I went out, on the ground and started to do, with kind of the observant attitude that the process, that my process entails, and this myth of abandonment that Shirley is talking about, it's really, you don't realize, that there are people behind the ruins. I mean, there are a lot of buildings that I researched that used to be old factories, like booming businesses, breweries, and they're seemingly in disrepair. It seems like, there's no use for them, but for example, the Iroquois Brewery on Pratt Street, there is a tenant there, and they're trying to do something with the space. They don't have the resources, they don't have the capital. And so, talking with these people, about their property that they're trying to hold on to, that they're trying to maintain and make use out of, and there's just no money there. It's it's a big issue, and you want to expect that from a building that hasn't seen the level of activity that it did in the 40s and the 50s and so on. So, and on the other end, there were properties that just were completely fell to ruin. I mean, a few of the pieces that I did were of the foundation of an old factory that, just was completely disinvested in and just left to rot. So, and one of my favorite buildings was the Church of Transfiguration on Sycamore, and the owner there has been working tirelessly, almost single-handed, trying to keep that structure up. And but he's just one person, you know, and it requires funding to kind of keep these gems of buildings standing, and you know, there's only so much you can do alone. So,
And I think that brings up a really interesting point about access, and this goes back to what Dr. Taylor was saying and what Denise was saying, you know, these buckets of money, yet we hear people that are inside these structures, and I think about this very often. We talked a lot about this when Justina was exhibiting here, how hard these individuals were working to try and preserve these structures, and they didn't have, it's not that there's no money there,
That's right.
it's that they don't have access to the capital.
That's right.
And I think that that's something we can talk about, and I think we want both Dr. Taylor and Denise to talk a little bit about that, about you know, the space between the piles of money, the pools of money that we all know now are here in Western New York, and some of those barriers and some of those ways that maybe creatively people can think about approaches to have those who are so invested in sweat equity, in generational equity, in you know, being true members of these neighborhoods, and how to get access and how to have some value given to those individuals and to that relationship, that authentic relationship to place, to ideas. So if Dr. Taylor, if you and Denise want to maybe address that a little bit.
Okay.
Just a couple of things before I say that. I just wanted to stress that the kind of homelessness that Denise was talking about is driven by the hard reality that Buffalo's rate of eviction is the highest in New York State. The highest in New York State. And again, that goes from the kinds of policies that we see going down, and the kind of death and dying and hardships that she was mentioning. That's what I was talking about when I said we don't deal with human dignity. And in the United States, we do not believe that human life is precious. We believe that some people's lives are important and precious, but others are the throwaway people. Back to the question. We have to liberate our minds and rethink how we build cities in order to deal with the kinds of issues that we're talking about, of abandonment, of the way in which they build cities. I mean, like right now, with the billions of dollars that was talking about earlier that are being invested on the East Side, those projects are meaningless because none of them are connected to neighborhoods and communities. They're just site-based projects with limited visions. The way you're supposed to do that kind of work is you have a neighborhood, and then on the basis of that neighborhood and deep interactions with all of the people who live in the neighborhood, you generate an idea of the place you want to create. And when you go about planning and development in that way, and then if you anchor it around a notion of common resources, we call it the commons, people need to gain control over those resources. The hard reality is that on Buffalo's East Side, Black people and others that live there, we don't own and control the land on which neighborhoods and communities are being built. Somebody else owns and controls that land. The other fact is that the community is the site of intense predatory investments. It's a lie that the East Side is a site of disinvestment. That's just a lie. I'll give you two concrete examples. The state and scattering all of its lottery machinery around sucks some $32 million a year out of East Side. Now, folks will say, well, why are the people paying the lottery in the first place? If you ask somebody on the East Side that, they'll smile and laugh. And you say, you only got a 1 in a million chance of winning. And they'll say, and if I don't play, I got no chance to get the resources to make my life better. So 1 in a million is better than none. So the point that I'm making is we can't do these things the way we're currently building cities. Right now, all over the East Side, including the Fruit Belt, the mayor has turned vacant land into a commodity. In the Fruit Belt, Reverend Chapman bought 3 lots for a project he was going to develop. I'll let Denise evaluate the project. But the city charged him $90,000 for 3 unkept vacant lots that are appraised at only about $16,000, and that's an inflated price. Then all over the city, so what I'm saying is those are common goods, resources. The Fruit Belt ought to own and control them. And this way we get the resources that we would need to develop the community in a just way. So how do we change the policy? First, we must cast away our illusions that any of those fools in City Hall are going to build the type of city that we want. We have to replace those politicians, starting with the mayor, with a breed of politicians who believe and hold our own values. That is our only hope of aligning City Hall with the processes that are necessary to move. One last point I want to make is that when we talk about the wealth that is being sucked out of the East Side, you have people paying 40 and 50 and 60% of their income on substandard housing, unhealthy substandard housing. We call that rent gouging. And most of these units are owned by people who don't even live in the city. So you have millions of dollars being sucked out of the East Side and sucked out of the city without producing anything before they fly away. And so those are the types of predatory activities that we have to stop. And we have to fight to gain the kinds of investments that would allow us to build and develop these communities. So when we have folks who are attempting to restore these vacant properties and to build them, then they ought to have the resources that are necessary in order to do that. Denise?
So let me say first, my sister from another mister swears that Iroquois beer was the best beer ever, 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 ever. She swears by that. And I wouldn't know, but I'm like, okay, if you say so. I've always said I find it interesting that we live in a city that is supposed to be renowned for its architecture, and yet they want to tear down everything that's aged. Any structure that doesn't seem valuable to City Hall, they'd rather take it down and replace it with something shiny and pretty. I don't understand that, but that's how the mindset of our politicians in this city is. I can tell you, probably now about 4 or 5 years ago, gorgeous cottage, fighting for properties, gorgeous cottage. It came to my attention that there was this beautiful cottage that was 140, 150 years old. It had good bones, it had good structure. It apparently had been built for a worker who was working somewhere close by in the neighborhood. They built him this cottage, and it was beautiful. And the neighbors wanted it to come down because they figured that it was an eyesore, it was old, it's collecting rodents, nobody's taking care of it. Trying to go in and to tell them, this has good bones for a building that's this age, and we can take this building and rehab it and repurpose it. So there was a fight about it. There was a process that happened.
Tell people who the we is. Not everybody might know.
Yeah, so Partnership for the Public Good, Preservation Buffalo, some of the leadership in the Fruit Belt neighborhood. We worked together on a number of things, but, you know, we were trying to let people understand that this could be rehabbed and repurposed. And the city was pushing with some of these residents to take it down. In any case, there was a cease and desist that they were supposed to leave it alone because it was supposed to be going through a process. And while that was happening, the very next morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, they came out there and they tore that cottage down. It's a heartache because, again, it speaks to the value system in this city where they feel like, you know, properties are really important. And we have seen the damage that's happened not just in our community, in a lot of communities. I feel so strong for the people that are on Elmwood because the character and the history of that community is being demolished a piece at a time. And I don't know how y'all deal with that. It's a heartache to look at from the other side of the city. I don't know how, listen. All I know is that we have to try to preserve what we have, what we can hang on to. We have to fight together. When I say we, I'm talking about the alliances that I work with. I'm talking about the people that really strive together to bring a conversation that says there's been enough damage done, even to the point of talking about the expressway. You know, it took me a long time to understand that this was something that happened across the nation. This wasn't just something that happened to my community. It felt personal because it happened to us. But this happened to communities of color all across the nation, that communities were divided for white flight. And so the damage that has been done from things like that, you know, we're fighting right now over this stadium. Well, the Bills played in my neighborhood originally at the Rock Pile, right up the street from where I live, right? I don't want to go into the long and the short of how I feel about that, but I'm just saying, you know, there's the value system because you up and left, you took your success with you, and now people that live on the east side of Buffalo that live in the Fruit Belt can't even afford to go to the games. And if they had a ticket to go, when they get in there, they can't afford to buy anything. That's not right. Transportation, I mean, there's a variety of things that are working together. You can't look at it as just one thing. All of these things are damaging communities in the city of Buffalo, the east side and the west side and all over the place, right? It's just one big, well-functioning oiled machine, and we have to be able to stand back. At some point, you know what? I keep telling people, they're coming for us. At some point, they're coming for you too. Don't be comfortable, because wherever you live, if they haven't looked at it yet and seen how they can make a profit of it, they're coming. They're going to find a way to get to you just like they got to where we are. So, you know, I'm about trying to build relationships and let people know, you know, we have to be able to protect what we have left. It's our city. It's supposed to be our city, and we should have a right to have some say in terms of what should happen and what shouldn't in building and structures in communities. All I know is that when you come for us, you're going to have to come for me. God bless you.
This was my concern. We've created all right, I'm loud. All right, a tangle. I think that seeing this intersection, it's a word, an academic word, I hear a lot, intersectionality, but I do
Yes.
think, another word, is connection, recognizing another holistic, right? As you talk about neighborhood development, you're also talking about transportation.
Absolutely.
You want to talk about some of the education issues here in our community.
Absolutely.
A lot of that is rooted in transportation.
Absolutely.
Can't get to school because they can't get on the bus. These concerns are connected, and I think the people that are doing the grassroots work know it. The people that are doing the academic work know it. The people that are putting silicon and latex on the exterior buildings know it. So I think some of what we can talk about is how can we communicate that beyond our bubbles. How can we break through some of those bubbles? I think it was interesting, and I said this to Matt Kenyon in his exhibition, which I encourage y'all obviously to watch. There's a sign that he put that you can see from the water. It says, "We buy houses." We had a lot of school tours this week because apparently nobody wants their kids in school the week of Halloween. We did 4. And it was really interesting. The kids from the School for the Visual and Performing Arts, they knew what that sign meant.
Yeah.
They've seen it in their neighborhood. They know what it means when those signs show up. The kids from Alden didn't. They hadn't seen those signs in their neighborhood. So I think these are some of the things we can think about, and these are some of the things that we can do in an art space is talk about that. But I want to, go back, to me, I keep coming back to the individuals and the history, and I think what you were saying that was interesting. I think about Justina, the casting, I think about that telescope house.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of adding on, of expanding a neighborhood, and that was one of the buildings. And if you could talk a little bit about that, Justina. For me, I know, I could not look at that casting and not think about the people. There was, when Justina cast the telescope house, layers and layers and layers of paint came off. And for me, something that was so compelling about that object was that I couldn't look at it and not imagine the people that had painted their house yellow, and then green, and then gray, and that each of these layers of paint had DNA,
Yeah.
and they had choices, and they had hope. I think about these immigrants coming to this country and building these homes and bringing their families over, so extending the homes and the pride of painting. And I think it was just, for me, that was one of the most poignant pieces in your exhibition. But if you could maybe talk a little bit, because I know we're getting close to the 7 o'clock hour, about how you were able to take off so much from the exterior and take that embedded in your material, and what that means for your artistic practice and for the objects that you're making and what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of nice to hear you say that was one of the most poignant pieces, because I honestly didn't think it was going to come off. It was one of the most difficult ones for sure, but I can tell you that I know the owner personally. He's a good friend, and he's been trying to hold down the fort for a while over there. And sorry. Okay. There's something about these pieces, at least for me personally. And I'll just say, it's kind of funny because some people are like, "Oh, well, you're damaging the you're taking away from the structure, you're damaging it." But in this particular case, it was really interesting because the owner is, chipping away at doing work to this building little by little, and so I kind of helped him. Helped him get a clean slate.
What were some of the materials? Explain to people some of the materials that came off when you pulled off the latex.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Telescope House specifically was really interesting because there were so many layers caked on there, and I think, with any of these pieces, the material itself really kind of tells a story about each of the structures in a way. There's so much history embedded, and it makes you think about, who was occupying the space at the time, what was happening in that neighborhood, and it kind of makes you think about like how things once were and like how could things be in the future. I mean, we're at such a low point, we can only move forward, and are we gonna stay in this state of regression or progress? And I think design professionals specifically and architects have kind of an immense responsibility to the community, just in the sense that, the work we do has such an impact on everyone. I mean, whether you think about it or not. And I think it's really important for design professionals and architects to not only donate their time and volunteer, and I almost don't like to use those words because it implies that it's almost like optional in a way, and you can throw money at something, be like, here you go, but I think what's more valuable is donating skills in the sense of pro bono work. And I've been fortunate enough in my experience to work on a few of those projects where it's about engaging with the owners, with the people in the neighborhood, understanding what they need, because architecture, to an extent, you have the ability to create positive effect, right? Create a design and experience that's going to positively affect people, but a big part of that is understanding the needs of the users, and without being on the ground and engaging with the users, I mean, you're not really going to be able to make that much of an impact. So, and I don't think we can really, like, me personally, I can't really wait for the distinctive title of being an architect. Like, I want to do the work that I care about now. So I think what that means is that, we have to make our voices heard, talk to our bosses, talk to our policymakers, let them know that we're not going to settle for anything less, that we need to do more pro bono work, and we need to set an example for other architects and design professionals to give their skills and do this work essentially pro bono. So, sorry, I'm rambling now, but there you go.
We're talking about really big ideas, and I want to it's just about 7 o'clock, and I want to end with Denise. It's interesting when you talk about projects. In the not-for-profit world, we hear that word a lot. It seems that, it's like we have to prove like we're going to do something that's fundable for this little window, and we don't want to really, they don't really want to commit. If you could just address, a little bit of what you want to see change in your neighborhood. I know this is a huge question I'm asking, I realize that. And I know you have a lot to say, but if you could just kind of like think and end on that, and then we're going to all stay, we're going to have some drinks, we're going to talk to each other, we're going to get to know each other. But if we could end on that, Denise, on some of the things that you want to see change, and some of the things you want to see not change, things like the cottage, that you know, if you could just speak to that, and we'll end on that note.
Okay, so that's a tall order. Well, you know, I like some people a lot, but I have to say some things sometimes that might hurt somebody's feelings. The way that urban planners have been trained for generations has not been right. They've been trained to be gentrifiers. And so there's been a lot of damage, much to what Henry had talked about, in communities, because we get these people that come with these designs and these skills, but they don't have the mindset of what that community is about. And so we need to have a you know, I'm part of the Just Transitions framework. If you're not familiar with it, you should look it up. But it's a collaborative effort for us to build communities that are not just sustainable, but they benefit everybody. They benefit the business owners, they benefit the homeowners, they benefit the schools, they benefit everybody. It sounds like a pipe dream, but at some point what we're dealing with this capitalist manufactured, you know, system that we have right now, it's going to come to a head. We've seen gentrification happening in Africa, in all kinds of places, like wherever they think they're going to go next to make this big golden pot of money, I don't know. But in the meantime, the damage that's happened from the people that have been left behind are where we have to have the conversations. There has to come a point in time when people have an understanding that those who live in the communities know what they need. We know what's best for our people. We know how we once had a place that was self-efficient. We had businesses. You know, you come to our neighborhood now and maybe there's nothing there, but that's not our fault. There were businesses that were there. We were almost self-sustaining, and that has been eradicated. And so, you know, people know what they need. There hopefully will come a point in time when we'll design communities, design neighborhoods collaboratively together. It's not just going to be the great idea that comes out of City Hall that get passed on to a contractor and a developer, and they think that they know what's best. That has to stop. But we're the ones that have to stand up and make it stop, because it's not going to stop on its own. That machine, that engine is just going to keep winding and burping and gobbling up everything it can in its pathway as long as we allow it to. People have to be willing to stand up and say, this is not happening anymore. We want to be heard. We need for you to understand that we know what we need. This is not good for our community. I don't care what you think or how you feel about it. This is not right. I don't know how I can put it better than that. You know, our elders in a lot of cultures, people have great respect and really value the elders. We value our elders, and we do not want to see them. I do not want to see my elders continue to die off and never see my community prosper. It has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening. This is not the end. This is where we'll stop the panel. We're going to ask you to stay. We're going to ask you to introduce yourselves. We're going to ask you to ask questions, to have conversations, to look at the art exhibits. As I said, Justina's exhibition, we have catalogs at the back table. We do have some cards if anyone is willing to give us some feedback. Lauren, if you want to raise your hand, Lauren's going to have some of those cards available. And if you have any questions for any of us, you can certainly ask the staff and our panelists. So everyone's going to stay, and we're going to keep on listening and keep on learning and keep on talking. So thank you all very much. Thank you to M&T Bank for supporting Fourth Fridays, and thank you all for coming out this